Hey guys, it's Archon, and I just wanted to make this video explaining why I think the Demon Hunter might feel a bit underpowered. So players have been complaining to Blizzard for a while that the Demon Hunter needs to be buffed, and usually there's two pieces of criticism that they bring forward, and I think maybe only one of them is entirely valid. The first piece of criticism is that Demon Hunters can't handle the higher monster powers. And I think that's not necessarily true. Demon Hunters can handle the higher monster powers. It's just that you have to put so much defense on it that you're going to lose some damage. And typically it's more efficient to have a lower defense, maybe 400 all res or less, so you can get as much damage as possible, and then you can do the lower MPs and use Shadow Power Gloom to stay alive. However, this is also true with the Archon Wizard. You can spec the Archon Wizard to do MP10, but it's fairly difficult and typically more efficient just to put a lot of damage on there with base defense and do the lower MPs. So I don't really think that's a fair argument for the Demon Hunter because you don't hear the same argument for the Archon Wizard. However, I think the one valid argument for the Demon Hunter is that they're not as efficient as the Wizard, Barb, and Monk, and I think this is entirely true. However, I don't know if buffing the Demon Hunter directly is the best answer to this problem. Demon Hunters don't seem to do any less damage than the Wizard, Barb, or Monk. They're able to put out a lot of DPS, and they can have just as much defense. Especially with Shadow Power Gloom, you can be really tanky as a Demon Hunter. If you stack enough crit, you can keep your discipline up high enough. You can have Shadow Power Gloom on almost the entire time. So it's not a damage or defense issue, it's a gameplay issue. If you've been to my live stream recently, you know that I've been building a softcore Demon Hunter. I actually got it up to level 60 and then started gearing it out myself. But as I was gearing it out, my good friend AMJ from the stream said that he would just like to lend me some of his amazing DH pieces, and then he bought me a few as well because AMJ is just a really nice guy. He likes to see me super geared. And I also borrowed a Dead Man's Legacy from our Cutsman, so thank you guys. But I ended up with a really sick DH set. This is a mana core with 1344 damage and two sockets. Yeah, you might have seen it. I think it's been duped a few times. We have this amulet, it's probably the best piece. This is worth 10 to 20 billion gold right here. It's also been duped a few times. But overall, this whole set is probably worth 40 to 50 billion gold. And if I had a higher Paragon and I wasn't using a Hellfire Ring, I could probably get a lot more damage. Could probably get close to 500,000 damage. These bracers also aren't that great. But overall, it's just a really crazy DH set. It's given me 417,000 damage at Paragon 23 with 64,000 health. And it's been a lot of fun to just rip through things on a Demon Hunter. But even with this crazy set, I can't really compete with the efficiency of an Archon Wizard, for example, or a Whirlwind Barb. Even with a 100 mil budget, I'm pretty sure an Archon Wizard could outfarm me in this crazy Demon Hunter set. And the biggest reason, I think, is because the Archon Wizard and Whirlwind Barb have more efficiency in their builds. They're not necessarily doing as much DPS. If you do a DPS test against Gome or any other big mob, usually you can put out as much or more damage on the Demon Hunter. But the thing is, the Demon Hunter has to constantly be repositioning himself or trying to aim the spells in a way that they might miss. On the other hand, the Whirlwind Barb can constantly be moving as he's doing damage and actually gets a speed increase, while the Archon Wizard can do a little bit of damage while moving and can hit pretty much anything on the screen from wherever they're standing. So although the Demon Hunter's damage and defense may be on par with the other classes, they really can't compete as far as farming efficiency goes, which is really all that matters in Diablo 3. However, on the other hand, the Demon Hunter has more skill diversity than any other class as far as viable builds go. The Witch Doctor might come close, but the Wizard, the Barb, and even the Monk really only have about 2 builds. You could argue that they have more than that, but I would say they're just variations of those 2 builds. And the Demon Hunter, on the other hand, has dozens of viable builds. There are some skills that every Demon Hunter is going to use: Shadow Power Gloom, Archery, Vault. Almost all Demon Hunters are going to use those, and some other ones are pretty popular. But when you look through the Demon Hunters, they have a lot more diversity between them than the other classes. And you could argue that some builds of the Demon Hunter are a little bit more efficient than the others, but it's really like a 5 to 20% difference in efficiency, which is much less when you compare an Archon Wizard to maybe a Blizzard Hydra Wizard, which obviously just isn't going to be able to compete at all. So in that aspect, I think you could argue that the Demon Hunter is actually the most polished class. However, we're still left with the issue that it's not as efficient as the other classes, and it is a big issue. And I think the reason is because of these exploity type builds. And when I say exploity builds, I mean the Archon build, the Critical Mass build, Whirlwind Barb, Zero Dog for Witch Doctor. And I know they're not actually exploiting the game, but I call them exploity because you can tell that Blizzard didn't intend for these builds to exist. Blizzard has come out and said they didn't intend for you to be in Archon all the time or be in Wrath of the Berserker all the time, and you can tell they didn't plan on Critical Mass Wizards being able to stun lock things all the time, as in the second patch of Diablo they actually disabled Critical Mass completely. But players really enjoy these builds. So the question, which has been going around for a while, is what do you do with them? Recently, the devs made a blue post saying that they're considering making it so that you cannot permanently stay in the Archon form or in Wrath of the Berserker. Essentially, just getting rid of the exploity builds, which would fix the problem, but of course is not very popular with the players. Because if you're playing an Archon Wizard and you really like it and they take that away from you, you feel like something got taken away from you, and that's not a very good feeling. So most players would rather them just leave it how it is or buff the other builds. Now, leaving it how it is doesn't fix the issue, obviously, and buffing the other builds is also hard. Buffing every other skill essentially is the same thing as nerfing these skills, but when devs can, they like to buff things rather than nerf it because players react poorly to their favorite things getting nerfed. So you could go through and you could buff every skill other than the ones that are being used in the exploity builds. And that's actually what we've been seeing the devs do recently. They're slowly going through and buffing skills, but I think what we're realizing through this process is the amount that they would have to buff each of these skills is pretty tremendous, because you don't just have to make it so that these other builds do as much damage and have as much defense. You're also competing with the fact that the Whirlwind Barb can continuously run while they're doing damage, and the Archon Wizard can hit anything on the screen and do some damage while they're moving. Competing with that gameplay means that you would have to have these other builds do a lot more damage than Archon or Whirlwind if they're to be on par, if they're really to be equal with those exploity type builds. And at that point, Archon form, Wrath of Berserker, Critical Mass aren't going to feel powerful at all. They're going to feel kind of weak compared to the other skills because you're going to have to be doing less damage. Because again, if you're not doing less damage, if you're doing the same damage, then you're still going to be more efficient and it doesn't fix the problem. Another option would be just to create more of these exploity type builds. Players like the exploity builds. They like to feel like they're taking advantage of something. They like to feel like they're really powerful. So why not just create half a dozen to a dozen of these really powerful builds that take advantage of skills in fun ways for every class? And then every class can have a ton of builds that feel like Archon or Critical Mass or Wrath of Berserker. Everyone feels really powerful. Everyone feels like they're taking advantage of something, and we're still on par with each other. And I actually think this would be a great option if it didn't take up so much developer time. It seems like creating these exploity builds would take up a lot of time. You'd have to redesign a lot of skills, add a lot of different synergies between the skills, and you have to remember a big part of the development process is allocating time to different projects. Any amount of dev time you put onto one project means you're taking away dev time for another project. You can't add anything to the game without sacrificing something else that could have been added to the game. And seeing as they already have a lot of skills that work well with each other when you remove the exploity builds, I think that might not be the best use of the dev time. Now, there is one other option which I would consider to be the best option. It's by no means perfect. However, none of these options are going to be perfect. We're always going to have to sacrifice something in order to get something better. However, I think when you look at all the choices, this one adds the most to the game. So currently in the game, it's very easy to create these exploity builds. Anyone shortly after hitting level 60 can acquire a couple million gold, go to the auction house, and get the gear they need to stun lock permanently in Critical Mass, or to stay in Archon form or Wrath of Berserker. You very quickly get these powerful builds, and at that point, you don't have anything big to look forward to through your farming escapades. Sure, your build gets more and more powerful over time. Your damage is going to increase, your defense is going to increase, you can go up monster powers, but you already have the most exciting thing. You can stay on Archon all the time. You can Whirlwind. You can Stunlock. That's the most exciting thing. That's what really makes you feel powerful. And you're done looking forward to that shortly after you hit level 60, which I think really lowers the excitement of the game. So what if they got rid of the exploity builds? They got rid of the ability to stay permanently in Archon or Wrath. They got rid of the ability to stun lock in Critical Mass, but then they added items to the game which would allow you to do that. And these items could be set items for your gear. They could be something similar to rune words, but they would be hard to obtain. They would take a large amount of time and they would be bound to you, which means you couldn't just go to the auction house or real money auction house and buy them if you had enough gold. You would actually have to work for them. This would give you a project, something to look forward to, and when you finally did obtain everything you needed, you would feel really powerful. Because you wouldn't be one of the millions of critical mass wizards out there. You would be one of the few. You would join a public game and someone would be like, wow, someone who actually obtained the set or the rune word so they can do critical mass. This is awesome. They can stun lock things for us. And you would really feel like you earned that. And it would really stretch out the excitement that you get in Diablo 3, because even before you got the build, you would be working towards something. You would have something to look forward to, something to become more powerful with, and you would still have a lot of different viable builds. You would have all the builds that you would have if you remove the exploity builds, but you'd still have the option of going after those really powerful builds. And then over time they could add even more builds, so you don't just have one or two choices to go for each class, but you maybe have a handful of them. Except they wouldn't have to put them all out at once, so their dev time could be spread out further along the process. Each patch could include one or two more exploity builds, which of course would be delivered in the form of a set or rune words or anything else, but just a group of items that you had to obtain yourself that would give you the ability to obtain a really powerful build. Again, I know it's not perfect, and I know some players would rather just leave it the way it is, but I think it is a big issue, and I think something like this would really fix a lot of issues with the classes in the game. But that's just my opinion. I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know if you think one of these options is viable, if you agree with me, or if you think that I left something out and you have a better way to fix it. I'll read as many of the comments as I can. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button, and I'll have another one for you soon.